Just kind of going quickly through the performance. Generally, the system's capable of meeting the current and future demands within a 20-year planning period. The report looks at, like I say, current demands, and then we forecast demands, regulations, requirements 20 years ahead to kind of get a holistic view of what needs to be done. The system performs with operation of all 3 source wells and water storage tank, and both water storage tanks to meet minimum Montana DEQ standards for production and storage. It's kind of critical because DEQ requires that your water system produce the maximum day demand with the largest well out of service. So the town is required to maintain and keep all 3 sources to meet that requirement. In 2006, well number 3 had contaminant concentrations of radium-226 and 228 that exceeded EPA's maximum contamination level. It was at a 7.1 picocurics per liter, and the MCL is 5.0, so it was slightly over. That well was retested in 2012 and was below those action limits. And well number 2 has been noted in the past as having some nuisance water quality issues, and also has some concerns with pumping influence on some other wells in the area.
Excuse me, when you're saying well number 2.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, maybe it's not a time for questions.
No, absolutely, absolutely.
But can you kind of say the well that is, the existing, maybe that they're gonna drill in adjacent to,
Yeah.
like maybe on the southwest, and on what kind of property, what neighborhood it's in?
Yep, so well number 1 is the primary well that's used by the town. It was the original well constructed, I believe, in 1939. And well number 2 is just down the street on, is it 2nd Ave near south? A couple blocks further this way. That well is the largest producing well.
So these are wells on the west end of town?
Yep, within the residential area. There's pump houses for both those facilities. Well number 2 is a well that has some nuisance water quality levels with odor and taste, and also has some pumping influences on other local wells. And well number 3 is located near the original water storage tank, just below that hill. It also has a pump house. It's the lowest producing well, and of significance, it's the well that has radium, elevated radium. It was constructed to a depth of 800 feet in fractured bedrock. The other 2 wells were completed and draw their water from above the bedrock, and that's the reason why they don't have radium contamination. Radium's from natural occurrences due to rock formations, and the additional depth is why well number 3 has that and other 2 wells don't. Does that kind of give you a little bit of background of where the wells are at in the vicinity?
Yeah.
Okay. Another deficiency that was noted was well number 1's been in service for about 40 years, and like I said, it's the primary well that's used. The system does have stationary, or it does have backup power that's mobile. The town has a generator that functions at well number 2. Well number 2 does not have a flow meter to record produced water. Montana DEQ requires that all finished water prior to entering into distribution be metered for tracking usage, accounting for where there might be problems. And then further, areas east of A Street on this side of town don't have adequate water mains or fire hydrants in areas that have recently been developed. And lastly, the original water storage tank has noted some paint peeling from the interior surface and inadequate safety apparatus allowing the crews to properly maintain the roof and vent. So with those deficiencies, we developed several alternatives to address those. The first project, or the first scope item, would be to develop a new well adjacent to well number 1. Additionally, well number 1's pumping capacity could be increased slightly to meet the max day demand. These 2 improvements would allow wells 2 and potentially wells 3 to be abandoned or removed from the system. Additionally, since we would consolidate the 2 primary sources to the town to 1 pump house, an emergency backup power source with an automatic transfer switch could be installed. And then, of course, water meters with the data logging could be installed at well house number 1 and well number 2 if it was used. Additional scope item would be to extend water mains and consolidate a loop around Bay Street, providing fire flows or fire hydrants in that area. And then another project would be to rehabilitate the water.
Town hall, this is scary. Excuse me.
The last project would be to rehabilitate the original water storage tank with a new aluminum roof and recoat the walls and floor. As part of our alternatives too, it should be noted that we look at no action items and what that impact would be to the town. So we look at both improvements and then a lack of action by the town and weigh those. Based on costs, public input, health concerns, and implementation strategies developed, that implementation strategy would be to complete all the alternatives as proposed in one project. The reason why that's done is it's economy of scale. The total budget for that project at the time of construction, which is projected ahead, is $1,087,630 approximately. And in our funding strategy that we identified as an option for the town, we looked at trying to maximize grant funding and minimize costs for the local ratepayers. Through this, the town is available to apply to 3 different sources for grant funding. That would be Treasure State Endowment, Rural Renewable Resources Grants and Loans, and Community Development Block Grants. Those 3 sources can provide grants up to $1,053,632. The local contribution to meet matches would be $34,000. And in the second public hearing, we discussed this. The rate to the users remains the same at approximately 53 cents per month per equivalent dwelling, which an equivalent dwelling is a standard home in town. And that's considering a 15-year term on that loan. So the next step is to apply for funding. Funding is generally done through the legislative cycle for several of these sources. So applications are due in the next 2 months, and then we'll find out whether the town is successful in those grant awards in the early summer of 2017 after the 2017 legislative cycle. And then construction could begin on the project in 2018. So with that, is there any questions, I guess, there might be?
Of course, the cost could go up between now and then.
So we projected current day costs, and then there's a inflation factor of 3% that's connected to that. So the grant applications in the funding package is projected to future value. It's not today's value, it's future value, when the project will be completed.
And you know, some of these things, as you say, are mutually exclusive too, right? Some of the options that are available for.
Yeah.
So, I mean, will that affect the cost?
Meaning-
You're saying install a new well number 1, pump and motor, but also drill a new well adjacent to well 1. Would that be taken from the same aquifer?
Yes.
It would.
And the reason why we do that, because well number 1 has the best water quality. It's completed in that gravel fluvial seam. There's property available at the well number 1 site, which is already owned by the town, to develop a new source. So we would just install a new well meeting setbacks from the sanitary sewer at that site. Utilize the existing pump house as a shared facility for both. So it consolidates the town's future operation and maintenance. But the project includes a new well, includes a new well pump for well number 1, which is upsized slightly. Currently, well number 1 pumps at 170 gallons a minute. The max day demand for the town is 78 gallons a minute. So if we were to increase that pumping capacity by 10 gallons a minute, you could now eliminate the use of wells 3 and 2. So that's why we would upsize that well pump slightly. It was pump tested in the past at over 200 gallons a minute, so that should be acceptable.
I just keep thinking of it's the same aquifer. I mean, if it goes bad or if it goes down, then we're out twice instead of
And
once.
that's why I would recommend leaving well number 2, not abandoning that, just using it as an emergency backup. It's in a slightly different location. It has the same aquifer, but honestly, that's gonna be the only aquifer that's usable in the town of Hot Springs.
So you're saying even the existing two is using the same aquifer?
It is,
now?
yeah, it's the same depth. It's just down the street about 2 blocks. So relatively close proximity, they're both the same depth that they're getting the water from. The only other aquifer that's in the Hot Springs area is that bedrock aquifer, and the well number 3 produces 40 gallons a minute. So for production rate, that's not the most feasible option to go back into bedrock, and you always have that concern of radium as a contamination.
Is there any way that you can, evaluate, that aquifer in terms of, serviceability?
Yeah.
Because it looks to me like the cost of putting a new pump in and drilling a new well there is pretty considerable, so.
Mhm. And the reason why you have to do a new well is DEQ requires you have 2 sources. So that's the reason why the second well. And when you develop a well, you're required to do a pump test. And when you do that pump test, you monitor adjacent wells. And with that monitoring, they do a hydraulic model that shows what the storage of the aquifer is, what the drawdown is, what the conductivity, meaning how much water is available to move through that. You look at the gradient and the recharge of that aquifer as well. So all that assessment is done at that time of the construction of the new well. Well number 1 and 2, I think, were both pump tested in the 2000s, early 2000s.
Okay. But you're saying two is in the same aquifer
Yeah.
right now too, so.
Yeah.
So then we would end up having three drilled
sources.
wells in the same aquifer. I guess I'm just concerned about the lifetime, of that aquifer. And
The other thing I guess to note is that wells 1 and 2 are either artesian or very close to artesian most of the time, meaning that they flow from the top of the casing if they're not capped properly, or they generally flow a little bit in the spring. Like well 2 flowed a little bit last spring. So usually there's plenty of water. It hasn't diminished during the town's utilization of aquifer since 1939. That's been pretty consistent. Looking at growth population, we looked at using what Sanders County has for a long-term average, which is 1.1% growth annually. That's what we use as our future demands at 178. So I don't think there's going to be a huge increase in production requirements for the town of Hot Springs in the future, and I don't believe there's any real reason to question Aquafer's capability to continue to serve the town as moving forward. The one concern that's probably you have is if that's contaminated, what does that mean? And that's a logical concern.
And the cost, you're saying that the cost to the residents, to the town, their match would be $34,000
With this funding package.
with the funding package. And what would you say the chances are for getting, you say that CDBG and TSEP and?
So TSEP is a competitive program, and so does CDBG. TSEP has a scoring of 7 statutory requirements based on severity of the needs, the community's financial requirements and needs, past planning efforts that the community has. Hot Springs have generally scored fairly well with TSEP. We used TSEP on the last water project, and they were used, I believe, on one subsequent water project before that. They also are a funding partner on the wastewater project that's upcoming. So I think that one has a fairly good probability of scoring well. CDBG is limited to communities with, I can't remember what the threshold is, but the town of Hot Springs qualifies for it. It's targeted at low to moderate income communities. So not all communities in the state of Montana meet that requirement. Hot Springs is one of them. Also, CDBG's funded several projects in Hot Springs and have been successful at those. And then the Renewable Resources and Grants is a grant aimed at promoting renewable resources, meaning water conservation, improvements to the water system. Again, many aspects of this project have renewable resources in mind. So again, I believe it would score fairly well. There's other grant opportunities out there. We just looked at the ones that are the most favorable for the town of Hot Springs to maximize that grant. TSEP can match CDBG and CDBG can match TSEP, so there's kind of an offset where the town isn't having to provide a lot of matching dollars.
What would happen if we got 2 out of the 3?
2 out of the 3? the town could elect to just put the project on hold and reapply for funding in the future. They could look at other grant opportunities through maybe rural development, which is a grant loan split.
And this decision is due when?
The
If
decision
you
to
apply now, I mean, this is what it is, it's
Yeah.
May, right?
Yeah, actually, the TSEP application is due tomorrow.
All right,
And then RRGL, which is Renewable Resource and Grants, is May 16th. And then CDBG is about 2 months away in early June, or early July, rather.
okay, and then you said the project would then actually go, if everything goes, it would then actually, production on it would start, what, in 18?
In 2018. Yep. Both RRGL and TSEP are programs that are administered through the state legislative cycle. So meaning that their applications are every 2 years, and then subsequently goes through the 2017 legislature. They set a threshold of what that scoring criteria is. Projects above that get funded, projects below don't. So you kind of pay attention to that, go testify for the needs of the community to continue to show that community support and the need for the project.
Okay. And the alternatives that are discussed now, this also includes the main line extension, is that what we're talking about, part of the project
Yep.
too?
We basically looked at the deficiencies, and the last PER that was done had these same deficiencies minus the water storage tank. And looked at kind of an economy scale, if we group them all together, that probably makes the most sense for the town. There's no needs that are really pressing above the rest. So let's reduce the costs of doing multiple projects and do it as one group. And that's why they're all grouped together in one funding application.
And, you know, I've been looking for graphics of exactly where that, how far out on, well, it's not on 8th Street, it's actually where it's north, that it goes down.
Here's a good illustration of it. The bold line is the new Waterman extension. So North Road is here, Spring Street. The green line is an existing 6-inch water main. This is an existing 8-inch water main. So I believe the aerial image is at 2013 or 14, I can't remember which, but there's several homes on these platted lots that have developed, and there's also additional vacant property in the same area. Montana DEQ requires a hydrant at every intersection, so these properties don't have adequate fire protection, and then also there's extended water services that just run back kind of one at a time for that. So it's just not an efficient way to service those properties and doesn't provide adequate fire protection.
And that goes, it goes past Leroy's place and then.
Leroy's house is right here. This is Leroy's house.
Oh, okay.
Just
So
show
it's
it.
like stop short of that,
Yeah, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. The guy just pulled a trailer in, there's 5. And these 2 lots have sold, and the owner is talking of 2 houses right now. Actually, he was talking of even redoing the boundary lines because there were the 2 houses he wanted to sell. Oh, and actually, the guy that just put that trailer in, he owns 2 lots, and he's bringing in another trailer, actually, I believe. His water application actually has 2 sewers, 2 waters, is what he's gonna pay for there, so actually, it's gonna be, all those lots pretty much are gonna have a house on them within the next year, so that's why.
And the 8-inch line is that, I mean, that seems pretty big compared to, but that's the main,
You know, Randy and I had actually talked about this last time. Montana DEQ requires a 6-inch minimum for any service, any main line that has fire hydrants on it. Industry standards, to be honest, are 8-inch everywhere, just to provide additional fire flow. As you get kind of out on the end of town and edges of properties, and you have a lack of looping, you need greater size lines to produce adequate fire flows. There's NFPA, the National Fire Protection, has minimum standards for what's required for a fire hydrant to produce, and that's the reason why an 8-inch line would be. We modeled it in our hydraulic model of what those fire hydrants would produce with an 8-inch line. So, and it also provides for more benefit for future expansion if it ever extends further to the west, or east, excuse me.
The DEQ requires like in city limits and residential areas, did you say one fire hydrant per intersection?
That's what
I mean,
there's-
Every block, what, there's an intersection every block.
That's what their standards state. You can get deviations from it. It's generally good practice to have a fire hydrant within a certain radius, which is about 500 feet is what's also used as an industry standard.
And is our town, aside from the existing 8-inch, that's already in the neighborhood of the east end of town, is our town pretty much, what, the smaller, diameter water main? Is that what we typically have in the, or we say?
It's a mixed bag. There's some 6-inch, there's quite a bit of 8-inch, there's a couple of 12-inch lines leading from the 2 water reservoirs. There's no deficiencies in
Okay,
this.
so, because, they're saying, they're talking about fire hydrants in the neighborhood of like, A Street and around there, it seemed like there's fire hydrant, Spring Street and north, and that whole big block, about every other corner kind of a zigzag. So what's the problem? Some of them are non-functional? Because it seems like when I drive around there's one almost on, every 2 blocks on each street, kind of alternating diagonally. And in town, I noticed that maybe there's been, maybe some that have been, are no longer in service because I don't know why, it just seems kind of lopsided that they're focusing over there when just haven't like made a map or walked a whole town, but just casually observing, I don't see anywhere near, that kind of concentration of fire hydrants in the neighborhoods.
There's probably 2 reasons for that. DEQ1, which regulates water supplies, hasn't been updated since the 2003 and the 1987 water projects, which is when all the water mains in town were installed and the fire hydrants. To my knowledge, the town doesn't have any problems with their fire hydrants. They're all fairly modern fire hydrants, and they're still serviceable for pretty good parts. So, to my knowledge, none of them are bagged or committed out of service or have been removed.
I thought
It was more or less just a spacing that was done currently with the standards at the time of installation. It's not a deficiency that is serious enough to warrant installing other fire hydrants. When we move forward with future planning, we just look at what current standards are, and that's what the current standard is. So for planning purposes, that's what we present in our cost estimates. If the town wants to eliminate that in the final design to go to more of say a 500-foot radius around each hydrant, and that's what you use for your spacing your hydrants, we could look at that. It's just a cost
Just
deduction.
asking. And the other question would be about there's 2 wells that are possibly gonna be abandoned, and where are they located? I'm sorry.
So,
this is your path.
well number 3 is the low producing well that has elevated radium, and that is located 1 street over, underway to the original water storage tank. There's a small building outside of city limits. Let me just flip to real quick.
Outside of city limits to the west or the south or
It's to the west.
the west?
The end of Central and then on up is the well house. That was actually annexed into the town of Hot Springs in the 50s.
Okay, so it's on the edge of town.
Right, and
Okay.
that part of that property was de-annexed.
And the other one, because I need to know that, also out of,
The other one, the well 2, Mary, is right behind the controversial trailer that just got put on the foundations,
I'll get it, yeah.
right across the alley, right
It's
there.
Just right by Leslie.
Yeah, I know,
Leslie
I've seen it.
Just
It
east of
usually
the-
flows in spring, because it's artesian or something. Oh, I just had a question, if the other wells that aren't, the water quality isn't good, maybe the limiting factor would be the cost of pumping or keeping water in them, but I was thinking in terms of what you mentioned about fire suppression, that, if they're not drinkable, are they valuable? Or is the cost of maintenance gonna make that not good, or would it be I don't know. You know what I'm saying?
We kind of looked at that. So well number 3 is the one that kind of outlies the other 2 as normal. It's a deeper well, it produces significantly less, and it also has the radium, which is a human health concern. So it could be usable for fire protection, but at 40 gallons per minute, it really doesn't have the production
Yeah.
to warrant any real use. So that's the well that in the alternative, in the implementation, it would be to remove that well from service entirely, abandon it, decommission the building so the town doesn't have to maintain that asset. Well number 2 just has nuisance water quality concerns and then interference pumping influences on other wells. So that's the well that we would recommend, just leaving in emergency service, leaving it connected to the SCADA system just for an emergency low level, but not using it regularly. Just having it as that backup source that's not as
So
close.
when you say nuisance, are you talking about pollutants, or are you just talking about the sulfur water? Some people don't like it.
The odor and taste.
Don't care.
So there's actionable limits that are human health standards, which radium is one of those. And then there's nuisance, which are unregulated, odor, taste, they're high iron, items like that.
Any other questions on the water PER? Any other questions on the water PER? No other questions on the water PER? Propose resolution 2016-008R. Open for public comment 2016-009R, declaring an intention to accept an environmental report. Turn it back over to him, but I think he already spoke just quickly that there are no.
Yep. As part of the funding applications, we're required to review environmental concerns ranging from water quality, dust, endangered species. Like I said, all the projects are basically located within developed areas and there's no identified environmental concerns.
Any public comment or questions for him on that? No public comment or questions?
You're on 9, are you?
9, yes. Next will be 2016-010R. It's to authorize application to DNRC and RRGL. I'll just have him touch really quick on what that is, so if anyone has a public comment or questions.
TSEP is grant opportunity.
We're on DNRC.
Oh, DNRC, sorry.
RRGL.
RRGL is Renewable Resources Grant Loan, it's for $125,000. And there's actually no match requirements for RRGL, but it can be used as a match for non-state dollars, such as CDBG grants.
Okay, any questions on that?
Then what would be the town's commitment in the face of that grant if it came through?
0 on that one.
Zero.
That one's no match. Any other questions? Next is 2016-011R to authorize application for TSEP grant. That's the Treasure State Endowment.
Treasure State Endowment's another grant opportunity. It has a matching component of 50%. The dollar amount is $487,000, I believe. Match components for that grant are met by CDBG, which is a federal grant, and then the small $34,000 loan component. $34,000. That's what it is.
That TSEP would
that's
be
part of it.
484, CDBG would be 450, and it can be used for the match.
Okay.
So we end up paying 34,000.
And that's really for the whole.
That's for the whole project.
Okay.
Okay. Any public comment or questions on TSEP? You know?
So where does the town intend to acquire $34,000?
The PR identifies intercap loan as an opportunity. It's a low interest loan through the Montana Board of Investments. The terms on that are up to 15 years. The current interest rate is 1.4 or 1.55% annually. And that's the 53 cents per EDU, or per home essentially.
So that's where our water will be raised, because we'll actually be paying it.
For the loan portion, yes.
Maybe.
Maybe.
We'll have to, and that's where we look at, which we did in December, I think. The guy came and talked about, and ran the EDUs and stuff, is they look at all those, where that value is, where the costs are, and then as to usage and to ratepayers. The more ratepayers, of course, the less it costs per person. So we just have to run those numbers and look to see whether the rates are gonna go up or they're gonna stay the same. on that. And that's kind of as you go down the road here, where we do that, try to do that yearly anyways, to look at where rates are because of fluctuations in power bills or maintenance costs, testing and all that stuff. We look at that continuously.
I guess just that the 53 cents per EDU is a very simple, basic analysis. We basically just look at what the debt service the town has and distribute it equally. We don't look at any other effects of operational savings or any other
What does
offsets.
EDU mean?
An EDU is an equivalent dwelling unit. It's just what we use to standardize the difference between what the school's impact on the water system is compared to what an individual home is. A standard residential home is 1 EDU.
I just gotta confess, this horrible thing is that it is difficult for me to wrap my brain around all the economic factors, considering that, you know, we have existing loans and, you know, we get the monthly budget reports, but then there's maybe twice a year, you know, kind of a State of the Union financial address. I mean, for me to project numbers into the future and with a every 6 month kind of checking in, maybe I'm wrong, but, you know, maybe every 3 months, or if there was some kind of a running thing so that by the time things kick in, which it is gonna, if they don't even start construction till 2018, and then we'll know if some of the grants are coming in by 17, but to commit now, I don't feel capable of understanding. You know, will we kind of be keeping up? Will we pay down and then acquire and then pay down? Will we, or will we, you know, because when you talk in terms of like $500,000, I don't know, this is way out of my league. I just get green around the gills kind of just thinking about committing, you know, taxpayer money considering,
Water user money, not taxpayer.
well,
You know, tax dollars are not used.
What do you
and
start
also just
taxpayers?
doing projects for projected, and it's for sure that there is gonna be development where the lots are selling and the trailers are coming on and everything, it's just,
See an increase.
you know, all this stuff going on at one time, kind of something. And I'm for infrastructure, and I'm for water quality, but I just gotta say that I'm a little nervous about it.
Well, and it is big money and it is, you know, and all that, but part of it is, if we don't get the funding, we don't do the project. I mean, that's part of it too, Mary, is if one of these things
Is
fails, maybe
contingent.
TCEP comes and says, oh, we're only gonna give you $100,000, well then we gotta hold it, we gotta stop. I mean, we're not gonna go through the project and say, oh, instead of 34, we're paying 340. I mean, we can stop at any time, we're not locked into any of this.
On a time frame.
We're locked into
We're locked
applying
into it.
for it, but even if we get it and we decide not to use it, we can always say no. We're locked into, we need to apply for it, or we're never gonna even go down the road. I mean, that's where we're at now, we're not spending anybody's money, we're not, even if we apply for this and get the money, until we accept the cash the check, we can say no at any time, so. I mean, you have a couple of years to wrap your mind around this one.
When the time comes, will there be public comment?
Oh, there's gonna be lots of public input and your input too through the whole thing and keep you up on what's going on and where we're going, so. We have a question.
Yeah, at the last public hearing, I believe it was the environmental one, when you did the presentation, it was stated there that the rate would not have to increase by the 52 cents per EDU because of the restructuring of the existing loans. Has that changed?
I don't think it was saying that it wouldn't, I said that the town would look at that as an option to offset with refinancing. Because they had recently refinanced the RD loan for the 2003 water project, that they would take all those things into consideration. Which I, you correct me.
And well, and that's what we did is on the last water project is we borrowed money. And what we ended up doing is we looked at all the loans, we reevaluated them and actually we redid them. The cost savings on the interest is paying for the water tank. The ratepayer is not paying. We saved enough money in getting the lower interest. That's the difference. So it was actually no, and the dollar at the end was the same. So we borrowed
$142,000.
142,000, but the savings and interest is actually making that payment for us. So it's not costing the ratepayer. When we come to this one, we'll relook at that again and see how we can do that. 34,000, actually, we almost have that in some of our reserves. I mean, we could almost, can't quite write a check for it today, but maybe by then we just write a check and we're not borrowing any money. We don't borrow any money, it don't cost nobody nothing. You know, so I mean, those are some of those things we're gonna be looking at when it comes to that time, but tonight is what we're doing is looking at going forward and seeing what funding sources we get. Where we, you know, end up with that. Back to adding 10 new ratepayers, roughly is what's gonna go, actually more than that. You know, and with every new ratepayer, of course, they're paying into the system the same as you, so that system cost doesn't cost any more. That loan doesn't change if we have another 100 ratepayers, another 20 ratepayers. The cost of testing, the cost of pumping, none of that really changes with more ratepayers, but now you have more people feeding in, so.
Sharing the cost.
As the town grows and we got more and more people and more people developing helps hold those costs down.
I think just a real quick and simple math for what Randy mentioned there, the ratepayers right now pay, I think, at $32.58 is the average rate. So if you were to add 10 homes, that's $320 a month. The debt service, I think, is actually $280 a month for the $34,000 one.
So actually,
It's pretty close to that offset, if that's what the town did add.
the added ratepayers make that up, you know, so. Any other questions? No other questions on the public hearing? We'll open the town council meeting, roll call.
Smith,
Approval of minutes,
I move we approve the minutes.
I'll second.
motion making seconded to approve the minutes, any council discussion?